We're live on the University of Toronto downtown campus where pro-Palestinian protesters have set up an encampment. We'll have the latest on the situation in moments.
Starting today, drivers pulled over by the OPP for a traffic stop will also be required to provide a breath sample for alcohol screening.
And the Toronto Maple Leafs are getting ready for another do-or-die game against the Bruins tonight, this time on home ice.
Good afternoon and welcome to CP24 Live at noon. I'm Bakari Savage.
And I'm Lena Latifat. Thanks for joining us. Our top story, pro-Palestinian protesters have set up an encampment on campus at the U of T.
CP24's Courtney Hills is live at King's College Circle this morning, where you've been pretty much covering this story.
Yeah, that's right. Good afternoon now, Alina Bakari. We've been here since first thing this morning. We arrived actually around 5:30 in the morning. That's when many of the demonstrators had already breached the fence that we're standing next to, made their way onto the campus. So we'll spin our camera around, give you a live look at the scene this afternoon. We can see dozens of tents now on the campus here at King's College Circle, and many of the pro-Palestinian demonstrators who say they're not going anywhere until the university addresses some of their concerns. Now, the university had said they wouldn't tolerate an encampment. In fact, that's why this fence is up where we are. But again, the demonstrators tell us they arrived at about 4 in the morning. They broke through the fence here, made their way onto the property. Here's more from some of the organizers who we talked to earlier.
We are gathered here today demanding that the University of Toronto divest from Israeli apartheid and its complicity in the ongoing genocide. So the University of Toronto has divested from South African apartheid. They've divested from fossil fuels. And so this is not something new. Students have been making this demand of this university since 2006. A few weeks ago, we held an occupation of Mayor Gertler, our president's office, which is just behind us. And we had a meeting with the president, and we were basically given absolute non-answers. And we were not in having conversations in good faith. There was no sort of negotiation, so we decided to escalate.
What we're worried about is the fact that the university is stifling our academic freedoms. We've tried to reach out to the university in any way possible. We've had multiple actions previously, and the university has just ignored them.
We're seeing huge numbers of activists and students that are putting their bodies on their line, and they're dedicating everything to stand with Palestine, and we wanted to ride that wave. So this is why we're here.
And many of the people who are here as part of this encampment say they're also doing this in solidarity with other encampments that we are seeing at campuses really across North America now. This movement started in the United States. Now we're starting to see pro-Palestinian encampments set up at Canadian universities, including over at McGill. Now, we are in touch with the University of Toronto over this encampment set up overnight. Paraphrasing what they're saying to us, they say that they respect the rights of members of the community to assemble and protest within the limits of the law and U of T policies, but they can't interfere with the ability of students, faculty, librarians, and staff to learn, teach, and research. Also saying their preference here is to start with dialogue, and those who contravene the university policy or the law risk consequences. That could include suspension. And we heard that from the university a few days ago, saying, again, they wouldn't tolerate an encampment. If there was one, there would be consequences. It sounds like suspension might be on the table for this. In terms of security, guys, campus security is here. They were here when we arrived this morning, too. Security guards are kind of on the outskirts of the fence where we are. And Toronto Police, they're not involved in this. We noticed one police officer when we arrived first thing in the morning. We've been in touch with Toronto Police. They say they're aware of this encampment setup, but their assistance hasn't been requested by the university at this time. So we're waiting to see what the university is going to do here, if anything. But in the meantime, many of the demonstrators, well over 100 now on the campus property, say they're not going anywhere. Over to you.
All right, Courtney Hills, keeping a really close eye on this developing story. Thank you for this, Courtney. And as Court was talking about, the protest at the University of Toronto is now one of dozens happening across campuses in Canada and several in the U.S.
And for a look at some of the other protests, we're joined live by CTV's Scott Hurst. Okay, Scott, the Canadian protests, they joined several high-profile protests that have happened south of the border, but there's a noticeable difference in what we are seeing here versus the U.S., right?
Good afternoon, Bakari and Lena. And to add what Courtney has been reporting on at University of Toronto this morning, where that encampment popped up overnight, you heard one of the protesters there tell her that they're looking to ride this wave of protests. They've been inspired by what they've been seeing across the continent, where we've seen protests and encampments and demonstrations pop up at Canadian universities across many provinces. University of Ottawa, they had an encampment pop up because protesters there say they escalated the demonstration from a sit-in to an encampment because of the lack of response from the university. We've also seen demonstrations at University of Western Ontario, and out west we've seen encampments also pop up at University of Victoria and University of British Columbia. Pro-Palestinian activists that say they're not getting enough of a response from universities, as they're looking for universities to divest from companies linked to the war and publicly condemn Israeli actions in Gaza, and also for universities to cut ties and partnerships with Israeli institutions as well. And so that is why we've seen these protests pop up across the continent, as this is part of the demonstration that you're seeing right now at University of British Columbia. Now, south of the border, as you mentioned, there are dozens of protests as well. Some have been able to end peacefully, but we've also seen some violent crackdowns, particularly this morning at University of UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, where demonstrators were broken up. The encampment was broken up as violent clashes erupted when police moved in on the protesters. Despite an order to leave and UCLA declaring the encampment unlawful, thousands stayed at the encampment overnight, and we're hearing that there are more than 100 demonstrators who were arrested and detained, as we're looking at some of the video this morning. And this all started to happen around just after 6 a.m. our time here in Toronto, but that's much earlier out there on the West Coast. Just after 3 o'clock in the morning is when this really started to go down on the campus of UCLA. And we're hearing that there are upwards of more than 200 officers involved in this. And as I mentioned, more than 100 people arrested on the campus of UCLA after violent clashes there between counter-protesters just the day before. Now, just a bit earlier, we did hear from U.S. President Joe Biden, who up to this point has been somewhat silent on the protests across the country at university and college campuses and the crackdown at some of these institutions. Here's what he had to say.
We're a civil society, and order must prevail. Throughout our history, we've often faced moments like this because we are a big, diverse, free-thinking and freedom-loving nation. In moments like this, there are always those who rush in to score political points. But this isn't a moment for politics. It's a moment for clarity. So let me be clear. Peaceful protest in America. Violent protest is not protected. Peaceful protest is. It's against the law when violence occurs.
Now, another thing U.S. President Joe Biden mentioned is that he was asked whether the National Guard would be sent in. He said no. And he was asked whether this would change his policy toward the Middle East. And he said no as well. So we continue to see these protests pop up around the U.S. and around Canada, as some are being shut down as police move in on these encampments and these protesters, while we're seeing others like University of Toronto pop up overnight, inspired by what they're seeing at demonstrations across the continent. Bakari and Lena?
All right, Scott, thanks so much for this. And let's get to the conflict in the Middle East now, the reason why so many people are protesting. The latest ceasefire proposal, that is still being considered by Hamas. Delegates for the terror group left Cairo on Tuesday, and they're expected to submit a written response to the latest plan. The United States and other mediators hope a deal would halt Israel's plans of a ground offensive into Rafah, where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have fled, fighting in other parts of the territory. The proposal reportedly sets out a process that will bring an immediate 6-week ceasefire and partial hostage release, but also negotiations over a permanent calm that includes some sort of Israeli withdrawal from Gaza.
And taking a look at headlines right here at home, a child and an adult, they've been rushed to hospital. This is after being hit by a vehicle. It happened around 8:45 this morning at Mount Pleasant and Davisville. The victims were rushed to a trauma center with serious injuries, but both are expected to survive. And police say that the driver did stay at the scene, but it's not clear yet if charges are going to be laid.
GTA drivers should be prepared to provide a breath sample to police if they're ever pulled over by the OPP going forward. OPP say they're now conducting mandatory alcohol screening during every traffic stop in the GTA in an effort to keep impaired drivers off the road. They say impaired driving collisions and charges are up nearly 30% compared with the previous 5-year average, with the highest increase in the GTA. Refusing to provide a breath sample to police is illegal.
Since 2018, when the mandatory alcohol legislation changed, officers are now provided the ability to demand a breath sample of any driver, any motorist on a routine traffic stop, anywhere they are, without any suspicion at all. And so that's been in place now for several years, but because of the statistics that we've seen over the last 5 years and the steady increase of impaired driving related crashes, impaired occurrences, and charges, we have to do something.
And OPP say that those who do not comply with the request for the roadside sample, they could be charged.
Yeah. Well, back to one of our top stories. Protests on university campuses around the country continue, and there is an increased police presence at the pro-Palestinian encampment at McGill University, and this is due to a planned counter-protest.
Let's go live to CTV's Matt Grillo, who's on the McGill University campus in Montreal. You have been there since sort of this all started, Matt. Let's talk about what is happening right now.
Yeah, we're going to take a look here at what's going on. So there's a counter-protest, and then there's a counter-protest. So it's a lot of back and forth here. But basically, the day started with a counter, or what we were told was there'd be a counter-protest at 12:30 for pro-Israel groups and pro-Jewish groups, and then we found out that there'd be a counter-protest to that. So that's what we see here in this shot is the counter-protest from pro-Palestinian groups. They're chanting pro-Palestinian slogans and chants, if you will, and calling on McGill to divest from those companies that they claim are supporting Israel. Then a little further down the road are those rhotic gates. This is right on the campus of McGill University here in the heart of downtown Montreal. Those gates are actually closed off, and police have a heavy presence over there at the gates. They've essentially formed a line to block it off because on the other side of that is the pro-Israeli demonstrators, and they're set to get underway at about 12:30. So we have kind of these dueling protests, if you will, here right next to the encampment that's been here since Saturday.
Has there been any sense of a dialogue that's happening between these protesters and the university administration? These protesters have been there for days now. Any chance of conversation, Matt?
You know, it's been sort of on and off. We heard earlier in the week from McGill the accusation that the protesters in the encampment were not negotiating, and then we've heard other things as well. So we do know the president sent out a statement. President of McGill University, Deep Saini, sent out a statement yesterday calling on the encampment to basically shut down because it was illegal. And if that was the case, the university would set up a forum to discuss the demands of the encampment. Now, we did talk with a protester earlier this morning who said, that's not going to happen. We're not interested in a forum. It's certainly a step in the right direction, but we want a firm commitment from McGill University to divest before this encampment would go anywhere. So it seems as though perhaps there is a little bit of dialogue, but it's kind of on and off as this week develops.
If you can just stay with us, Matt, we also know that a Quebec court rejected the university's request for an injunction. Any developments on that front?
So it was a lawyer on behalf of two McGill students who had brought forward this injunction. It was not actually brought forward by the university, but they were certainly in court during this injunction hearing. So that injunction was denied, and the encampment here saw that as a big victory for them. And there was a real celebratory mood yesterday when that result came down. Of course, police were watching for the result of that injunction as well, and I spoke with a spokesperson earlier this morning from Montreal Police who said they're still going through the decision and looking through it at this point, but police are really on site here to make sure that both sides stay away from each other, to make sure the area is safe and secure. Now, of course, police said if they ever had to move into the encampment and perhaps close it down in any way, and that's of course if, it would be done peacefully, it would be done calmly, and verbal communication is key between the encampment and police at this point. And the Montreal police are saying they're watching watching what's going on south of the border, and they want to avoid that at all costs. So to go back to that injunction, that result came down yesterday. It seems both sides have kind of moved on at this point, and they've got the counter protests and the counter protests that are underway right now.
And also, Matt, regarding the police and the police presence, what exactly can you tell us about the police presence on campus? Because, we know that in the States, there have been police in riot gear. And also, are campus police involved in this, or is this just the City of Montreal police that you're seeing?
It seems like it's heavily Montreal police, although we have seen campus security guards walking around. But I can tell you, everywhere you look now, you'll see a police officer on site here. It's a far cry from what it was the last few days, where we didn't see Montreal police here at all, practically. But now they're pretty well all over the place. They're on bikes as well. We've seen police on horseback as well, and they've got those gates blocked off just down the road behind me here, essentially forming a wall, if you will, between the two protests, really to keep them apart and to keep a significant distance between the two groups, to keep everything under control.
Okay, CTV's Matt Grillo on the McGill University campus in Montreal for us this hour. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And coming up next on CP24 Live at noon, voters head to the polls in 2 provincial by-elections today. We're going to take a look at the races after the break. A retired OPP sergeant is coming forward saying that he tipped off police service about a jailhouse assault by an officer. He was told that there wasn't any misconduct, even though years later, a judge would convict the officer of a crime. And as CTV's John Woodward reports, the person who told him that there was no case is now a deputy commissioner of the OPP.
This is the video that ended up being crucial evidence in a conviction of OPP Constable Bailey Nichols, who grabs a woman arrested for public intoxication by the neck and shoves her head into cell bars at the Aurelia detachment in 2019. The incident wasn't reported to the SIU at the time, even though the woman was bleeding and needed 5 staples.
It was actually surreal. It was hard to believe.
Retired Sergeant Robin Moore heard about it from a contact in the force who had seen the video.
It's a crime scene. That should have been locked down immediately, and then notifications made from there.
That contact, Constable Charles Ostrom, has told CTV News incident reports didn't match what he saw in the video. He tried to report it internally, but it didn't go anywhere.
There is a fear of reprisals in that organization if you speak out. So he would have been punished. They couldn't touch me.
Moore wrote to OPP Commissioner Thomas Carrique, concerned about the incident and what he believed was a cover-up. That was in April 2020. About a month and a half later, he got this letter from the Professional Standards Bureau saying, "I can advise that in my capacity as the Bureau Commander of the Professional Standards Bureau, a review of this incident has been conducted, and I am satisfied that all officers involved did not commit misconduct." The letter signed by Marty Kearns. Kearns has since been promoted to Deputy Commissioner of the OPP. When we asked the OPP how Kearns came to that conclusion, a spokesperson told us the initial decisions made regarding misconduct were based on the information that was available at the time. The information regarding the severity of the injury did not meet the threshold for SIU notification. Moore also turned to the SIU, which got more information about the woman's injuries and invoked its mandate the following July. Last fall, Nichols was convicted of assault causing bodily harm.
It has to be a very, very high threshold of threat for a police officer to use that hold or restraint on an individual.
Criminologist Patrick Watson says it's hard to see this video and not see a serious incident.
They believed it reflected reasonable conduct, and I think this does raise issues for concern about the OPP's interpretation of events versus a citizen's interpretation of events.
The criminal case isn't over. Nichols has said she feared for her safety in the moment, and the Ontario Provincial Police Association has said it will appeal. The OPP says it's going to do a review of the incident and isn't ruling out further discipline now.
They were trying to make it go away. They wanted me to go away. I wasn't going away.
Moore thinks OPP brass should have seen earlier what he saw in that video and what a judge saw too. John Woodward, CTV News.
Voters head to the polls in 2 provincial by-elections today. 2 new MPPs are being elected, with residents casting ballots in the ridings of Milton and Lambton, Kent, Middlesex. The southwestern Ontario riding, previously held by Cabinet Minister Monty McNaughton, is widely expected to remain in Tory hands. But in Milton, that could be a really tight race. Galen Nadeau-Harris is running for the Liberals in what is a big test for their new leader, Bonnie Crombie to gain another seat in the legislature. Z. Hamid, a 3-time Milton councillor, is running for the PCs. We're going to have analysis and reaction to this, political reaction, coming up a little later on with Scott Reed.
Loblaw's new chief executive says that he's cautiously optimistic the company will be able to come to an agreement on the grocery code of conduct. The grocer has been one of 2 major holdouts on the code, which is intended to promote fair dealings in the industry. Loblaw and Walmart previously said that they could not sign the code because they were concerned it would raise prices for consumers. Her bank told analysts on a conference call that the company has been working with the committee creating the code. Ottawa has indicated it is open to making it law rather than voluntary if the major players will not get on board.
Coming up next on CP24 Live at noon, we are hearing from the Leafs ahead of tonight's must-win Game 6. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Well, the Maple Leafs held morning skate as they prepare for another must-win game against the Bruins.
Boston leads the series 3-2. However, Toronto comes back home with momentum on their side after the electrifying 2-1 win in overtime in Game 5 on Tuesday night in Boston. So head coach Sheldon Keefe says that Austin Matthews will not play tonight. He left Game 4 before the third period and didn't play at all in Game 5.
Excited and knowing, our backs are still against the wall here, so not much can change. We only have to get better. We want to, keep playing here. So I think just excited, especially to be back home and put our best effort forward.
I think we just got to play the full 60 minutes. I don't think we've honestly done that through this series. I think we've kind of been a little loose, and I think we're just looking forward to having a good start and play through all 3 periods.
Our approach to the game, it can't change. As I said, it's very clear how and when we've had success in this series and how and when we haven't. Thought we had a pretty clear picture of that coming back from the road after Game 2 when we came back, and we didn't execute that on the ice when we came back here. So that's the biggest piece for us is just coming out with the same mindset that we brought to the road.
And TSN radio host Matt Koss says that the Leafs have to be ready to play from the get-go.
Find out in the first period just about what sort of momentum is on the Maple Leaf side. And that's a cliche we use. Sometimes it's true, and momentum does exist. Sometimes we overplay it. If you remember in the last game, Toronto outshot Boston. It was like 12-2. I know the score was 1-1, but Toronto was clearly the better team. I'm curious if we see the same sort of result tonight. I think that's going to be key. There's more pressure on Toronto. They need this win more. They're down 3-2. I think it's imperative they get off to the sort of effort level that we saw 2 nights ago for Toronto to succeed tonight.
And a Toronto couple has decked out their Midtown home in support of the Leafs. Look at this. This is a house on Merton Street. It's fully decorated with team posters, flags, and memorabilia. It's something Sarah and Michael Adamson do every time the team makes the playoffs.
After our game on Tuesday, honestly, if they can go out and do exactly what they did, I think we've got the recipe for another win. I think that the goal is speaking of goals, is to get the first one. That was key for us getting excited, for getting the team excited, and stay out of the penalty box, please.
Okay,
that is
so
dedication. I like that.
Yeah, well, it's necessary. This is a big game.
We need the energy, the good thoughts.
And speaking of game time tonight, it's going to be a little bit later. It's going to start at 8 o'clock. Maple Leaf Square will once again be open to fans. Doors open at 6 o'clock, but you have to register for passes in order to attend. Well,
BMO Walk So Kids Can Talk takes place across Canada this Sunday.
Yeah, the family-friendly 5K walk is in support of Kids Help Phone. It offers free, confidential, and multilingual mental health supports to you through phone, text, and online resources.
Coming up next on CP24 Live at noon, we are live on the University of Toronto St. George campus. That is where pro-Palestinian protesters have set up an encampment. We'll tell you what the university is saying about this. That's next.
We're live on the University of Toronto's downtown campus. This is where pro-Palestinian protesters have set up an encampment. We will continue live coverage this afternoon with CP24's Courtney Hills.
Starting today, drivers pulled over by the OPP for a traffic stop will also be required to provide a breath sample for alcohol screening. We're going to break that down for you coming up.
And the Leafs are getting ready for another do-or-die game against the Bruins tonight, but this time it's on home ice.
Good afternoon and welcome to CP24 Live at Noon. I'm Lena Latafat.
And I'm Bakari Savage. Pro-Palestinian protesters, they've set up an encampment on the campus at the University of Toronto. And protesters say that they are calling on the school to divest from assets that support Israel.
CP24's Courtney Heels is live at King's College Circle with the very latest on this back and forth. Courtney.
And Lena, many of the demonstrators say they arrived first thing this morning, overnight. They say they breached the fence that's been set up here at King's College Circle, made their way inside. And this afternoon, you can see this live look on the campus grounds, dozens of tents set up here and quite a few demonstrators, well over 100 at this point. We've had a chance to speak with some of the pro-Palestinian demonstrators who say they are here for the long haul. They're concerned with the lack of dialogue, they say, with the university over some of their concerns. I can also tell you that this school had warned demonstrators that they wouldn't tolerate any sort of encampment. That's why the fencing was put up in the first place. But again, the demonstrators telling us they moved in at about 4 o'clock in the morning, so they pushed through the fencing here and they set up. I'll let you hear from some people who we talked to first thing this morning who are now as part of this encampment.
We've seen a recent wave of encampments go up across the U.S. and now in Canada. We were inspired by the Columbia encampment, which just ended 2 days ago. We wanted to ride this wave. Now that there's finally a lot of energy, we've been organizing on campus since October and long before October in solidarity with Palestine.
Our message to the University of Toronto is that we want them to divest, we want them to be transparent with their finances, and we want them to cut academic ties with Israeli universities on occupied territories.
Now, we are in touch with the University of Toronto on this development of the encampment overnight. We received a statement from them. I'll summarize. It basically says that they respect the rights of members in the community to assemble and protest within the limits of the law and U of T policies. It goes on to say that they prefer to start with dialogue with this, but anybody who breaks the university policy could be looking at possible suspension. And the university had warned of consequences with this if an encampment were to pop up here within the last couple of days. And now it sounds as though suspension is a possibility here. As for what is next in this, things have been peaceful much of the morning now into the afternoon. Lena, Bakari, I would say people continue to show up here, moving into the encampment. Campus security is here. They are set up on the perimeter, so just outside of the fencing here. They also say that the Toronto police are aware of this situation, but they haven't been called in to help assist in any way. So Toronto police aren't involved. So we'll continue to monitor this developing story. But the latest, this encampment now right in the middle of a King's College Circle, that is, at the University of Toronto campus. This after the school had warned that they wouldn't tolerate an encampment like this. Over to you.
Okay, so again, that's CP24's Courtney Hill. She's at the University of Toronto, but there's also an increased police presence at the pro-Palestinian encampment at McGill University. This is due to an opposing protest.
Officers arrived on campus early this morning and spoke to organizers of the ongoing pro-Palestinian demonstration. Montreal police say so far that protest has been peaceful. Officers have separated the pro-Israeli demonstrators by closing the campus gate. So that's the counter-protest we've been telling you about. Now, yesterday, a judge denied an injunction that wanted to move the protest off campus, saying the argument hadn't proven the protest was a safety threat. Meanwhile, Montreal police say they have no plans to remove the encampment, and they're evaluating next steps.
It's all about the approach. Since the beginning, we had a verbal approach and communication, and that's what the police department wants to do. It's to have a communication to make sure that if we have to go on the encampment and take things off either in the next few days or we don't know the time that's going to happen, we want it to be done peacefully in a way that would be respectful for everyone.
Protesters dismantled a temporary encampment on the campus at Western University. This is in London, Ontario. The university says that it spoke with the demonstrators and affirmed their right to protest while also outlining what activities are not allowed, including erecting tents. And those taking part say that they want Western to divest from companies that they say are complicit in Israel's assault on Gaza.
And camps have been set up at 2 more universities in British Columbia. Activists at the University of Victoria and at Vancouver Island University in Nanaimo say they're not going anywhere until their demands are met. for the schools to divest. The encampment at the University of British Columbia has now reached about 30 tents.
And a new poll finds that 2 in 5 urban Canadians, they've been disrupted by protests in the past 6 months. The Angus Reid survey finds that Canadians overwhelmingly believe in the right to protest, but there's a sense that not all groups are treated the same. 64% of respondents say that police give preferential treatment to certain protesters. Conservative voters feel that left-leaning causes, specifically pro-Palestinian protests, are given unfair leeway. Liberal and NDP voters are more likely to say the opposite. And overall, 3/4 of Canadians think that the right to protest should end when laws are broken.
Let's get to the situation south of the border now. Police removed barricades and began dismantling pro-Palestinian demonstrators' tents at the UCLA campus. This after hundreds of protesters defied police orders to leave. It comes a day after counter-protesters attacked the encampment for hours before school officials and campus police stopped it. This morning, officers took down the plywood, metal fencing, and dumpsters that had been set up around the protest site. Protests have taken over dozens of college campuses across the U.S. as students call on schools to stop doing business with Israel or companies they say profit from the war in Gaza.
And more clashes between protesters and police. This at the University of New Hampshire. And police, they were in riot gear. They got into a physical altercation with pro-Palestinian demonstrators. Some arrests were made. Police had warned that the encampment was in violation of the permit granted to the protesters. Well, U.S. President Joe Biden spoke earlier about the dozens of protests at university campuses.
I understand people have strong feelings and deep convictions. In America, we respect the right and protect the right for them to express that. But it doesn't mean anything goes. It needs to be done without violence, without destruction, without hate, and within the law. You know, make no mistake, as president, I will always defend free speech, and I will always be just as strong in standing up for the rule of law.
GTA drivers should also be prepared to provide a breath sample to police if they're ever pulled over by the OPP. This is going forward.
OPP say they're now conducting mandatory alcohol screening during every traffic stop in the GTA. This is in an effort to keep impaired drivers off the road. They say impaired driving collisions and charges are up nearly 30% compared with the previous 5-year average, with the highest increase right here in the GTA. Refusing to provide a breath sample, by the way, that's illegal.
We want to make sure drivers who are out there are safe and they're sober. And, and sometimes it may not be apparently obvious that they have been drinking. We've seen impaired drivers, with not a lot of, breath smells and out in the wind and the weather, it's hard to determine, and now this takes away any bias, any situations. We're just going to be testing everybody. And again, we want drivers to realize that's going to be happening. If you get stopped for any routine traffic stop, mandatory alcohol breath sample will be demanded.
OPP said that those who do not comply with the request for the roadside sample, they could be charged. Well, speaking of roads, let's get a check on the roads with Adjoa Ntia during this lunch hour.
Well, we are dealing with problems at Bakari. Good afternoon. Major problems that started in the morning. This is on the eastbound lanes of the 401 through James Snow Parkway. A crew's on scene of a truck which went into the ditch. So the cleanup is underway. Heavy tow has arrived on scene, but still those 2 right lanes are blocked, and that is a significant backlog. I only have the camera that goes from Highway 25, but the delay does extend from well before Guelph line. Southbound on the 427 in the express through Burnhamthorpe. Crews on scene of a collision blocking the right lane as well as the right shoulder. And if you're traveling towards the Gardner again, the delays continue as you make your way into and out of the downtown core because of the long-term road work between Strawn and Jameson. On city streets, we continue to deal with this collision impacting lanes on Wilson, right near Bathurst. And outside of camera view, we are dealing with the collision on Steeles and Woodbine. The ramp that takes you onto the southbound 404 not accessible because of an ongoing collision. I'll send it back to you.
The CP24 traffic report is brought to you by CapitalDirect.ca.
Well, today is the day that voters will head to the polls in 2 provincial by-elections. 2 new MPPs are being elected, with residents casting ballots in Milton and Lambton, Kent, Middlesex. The southwestern Ontario riding, previously held by Cabinet Minister Monty McNaughton, is widely expected to remain in Tory hands. But in Milton, the path to victory seems a little more unclear. And for a closer look at these races, we're joined live in studio by Scott Reid, CTV's political commentator. Great to see you, Scott. Thanks so much for joining us.
You bet.
So let's talk about the race in Milton, because it looks real tight. The PCs and Liberals seem to be neck and neck. What are you watching for?
Well, I'm actually watching to see how the Liberals manage expectations, because I don't think it's going to be tight. And I think if you want to be honest, you look at this and you say, this was a Conservative cabinet minister who stepped down. We know that the federal Liberals are low in the polls, and that's going to drag down, I think, the provincial brand. And the provincial Liberals are only polling at like 23%. So I think it's going to be really hard for Bonnie Crombie, even though Milton is her backyard as the former mayor of Mississauga. I think it's going to be really hard for her to pull out a win. So I'll be watching that one to see if the Liberals can manage the notion that they should win by a hair or lose by a hair.
Okay. This is a real test for Bonnie Crombie, and she's hoping for a different outcome tonight, that's for sure. What's at stake for that party?
Well, see, this is what I think is so interesting. I don't think there's a ton at stake, except for people are saying, wait a minute, this is Mississauga, this is Milton, this is your backyard. You're supposed to be the GTA leader that's going to give the Liberals a big lift, show that they can win in the 905, and I'm just not sure that's the test she's looking for. So I think they probably should have been working hard over the last few days to say, this is not a test. Don't mark us on this. Hey, Prof, this is not my best work. I'd like to hand in an assignment at another time. Now, who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they'll surprise everybody, because by-elections can be unpredictable. You get a low voter turnout, so if you're better organized and you get your vote out, then you're going to win. But if I was going to bet a nickel of my own money, it wouldn't be that Bonnie Crombie is going to come away with her first electoral victory as a leader.
That's very interesting. And of course, we'll find out what happens tonight. If the PCs take this and the Liberals lose, what do you think it would have come down to? What do you think it'll be about?
I think it's going to be, one, that the provincial Liberals haven't been able to elevate their profile in a real breakthrough way. I think, two, it's going to have a lot to do with the Prime Minister. Like, let's be honest. In Ontario, in the 905 and the GTA, the Liberal brand, provincially and federally, is kind of blurred. And so you know that the federal Liberals have been a drag on those numbers. And then I think finally you're going to want to watch and see exactly how much the Conservatives crow. They want this to be seen as a test. They want to show that they're lapping the field. And so I'll be watching that.
They definitely want this to be seen as a test. Yes. And you can see that from all the canvassing we've seen the PCs doing in Milton. Can you speak to their efforts?
Yeah, they've been sinking a ton of money in. You've got a huge effort on the ground, because they know that there is this sense, oh, this will be Bonnie Crombie's test. And they want to watch her fail. So they are putting every resource they can into that riding. In addition to that, we have seen the advertising that's going on province-wide and certainly citywide here across the GTA. You know, the negative ads against Bonnie Crombie, coupled with the positive ads about Ford. You know, the one with them getting in the SUV. Hey, it's Uncle Doug. Yep. Everybody loves him. So they're pounding and pounding and pounding. As much as anything, that, you know, those resources will help lift their vote. So I do think the Conservatives are going to win that riding. I'd be shocked if the Liberals did.
Wow, okay. I do want to point this out. I think this is so interesting. The progressive Conservative candidate has Liberal roots.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
This happens sometimes. Well, you know, his background as a Liberal, and so I think, you know, what you're seeing is, and I think this is to credit to Doug Ford and his team, they're not doctrinaire partisans, right? Doug Ford isn't a conservative. Not really, right? He's a populist and an opportunist, which, to be blunt, a lot of the best politicians are opportunists. So he wants to build as big and a broad a coalition as possible. You're a former Liberal? Hey, man, can you win? Yes? Then you're on my team. That's fine. So you would see some leaders in some circumstances say, no way, let's reward, you know, the longest serving Conservative or partisan in that riding who next best deserves it. Ford operation is built very differently. They're like, if we can bring new people into our voter coalition, attract more people to our cause, we're going to do it. Used to be a Liberal, don't care. Used to be a New Democrat, don't care. That's the way that he's built this party. He's really remade it over the course of the last 6, 7, 8 years and built a new, much broader, sturdier political coalition. And that's trouble for the NDP and the Liberals.
Okay, let's talk about the race in Lambton, Kent, Middlesex. That's supposed to stay with the Conservatives. Are you watching for any surprises?
Not really. I mean, watch for voter turnout. You know, if you get a really, really low voter turnout, maybe something strange could happen. Liberals have a good candidate there, too, to be honest with you. They've got the mayor of Lucan, sort of I forget what deputy warden, I guess, in the area. So, you know, this is a person who's well known on the local scene, but the Conservatives have, again, a local councillor. This was Monty McNaughton's riding. Many people say, you know, if and when Doug Ford decides that he's going to set sail and, you know, boost himself permanently in Etobicoke, step down as premier, that Monty McNaughton would be another potential leader. So, you know, keep your eye on that. Is this guy just a placeholder? Is he holding that riding until Monty decides he wants to come back? Or has Monty left public life for good? But if the Conservatives don't win that riding, then we should expect there to be a blue moon out tonight.
Okay. CTV's political commentator Scott Reed, always fascinating to pick your brain. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Lena.
And coming up next on CP24 Live at noon, we'll preview tonight's must-win Game 6 for the Leafs. Stay with us for that conversation.
Now that you're playing the same opponent and it's, you know, the game plan and the approach is similar, I think it's a lot easier to drive home here now. And you've been through what's worked and what hasn't, and you know, it's a mindset piece. That's why for me it's less about where we're playing and what the situation is. It's mindset based and being able to stay with it no matter what the game is bringing. Just trust it and stay with it and expect it to be difficult. Embrace it being difficult.
All right, so that was Leafs coach Sheldon Keefe. The Leafs, they're getting ready for another do-or-die game. It's happening tonight against the Bruins. This is a live look at Maple Leaf Square. It's quiet now, but that's not going to last for much longer because this time, this game is on home ice. So Maple Leaf Square, it opens up at 6 o'clock. The game actually starts a little bit later tonight at 8 o'clock.
Yeah, it's going to be a massive party there tonight. And for more on what could happen, we're joined live by John Viveros, the host of the Hot Take Hockey podcast. John, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So this is a real glimmer of hope after the Leafs won Game 5. How does the team use this newfound momentum to take Game 6?
It's definitely a momentum shift. And I think when you look at the Leafs currently as it stands, no Austin Matthews. So you really had to come together as a team in that Game 5. And I really think they went off the momentum. Joseph Woll was, I mean, he just had a great performance. I think when you look at the overtime saves, the Leafs really kept building the momentum off of that. And when you change goalies mid-series, that's what you're hoping for. You're hoping for that momentum shift right off of the goalie's performance. And that's what the Toronto Maple Leafs got. So when you're looking into Game 6, and Sheldon Keefe kind of talked about that in that press conference, that they're not really looking at home ice versus away. They're looking at mindset. And for a head coach to say that, I mean, that's because the Toronto Maple Leafs haven't won on home ice yet in this series. And usually a coach would definitely specify that and make it known that they're confident and feeling good on home ice. But Sheldon Keefe didn't do that. So that's one thing when you look at the Toronto Maple Leafs. They have not won on home ice. They're not looking at the home ice advantage as something to take part in. But hopefully the fans can be that seventh guy on the ice for the Leafs tonight, because you win Game 6, and then there's even more doubt in the Boston Bruins going to a potential Game 7. So I think that's kind of where the heads are at for the Leafs.
All right, John, let's go back to this. We know Austin Matthews is not going to be playing tonight. You said that the team has to come together. What does that look like for you when they hit the ice tonight at 8 o'clock to win this Game 6 at home in front of the home crowd?
Yeah, Bakari, I keep referencing 2018 because it's the exact same situation as we're looking at right now. The Leafs were down 3-1 in that series, and they came back to create a Game 7. Obviously, they lose that series, but maybe it's a different story here. They got depth in that Game 5, and then Game 6, you rewind back to 2018, they got big goals from Mitch Marner, William Nylander. Well, fast forward to 2024, those are the two guys the Leafs are going to be relying on tonight. John Tavares in overtime, Mr. Captain, was the guy that created the goal, and Matthew Knies putting it home to send the Leafs back home. And now you're expecting number 88, William Nylander, and number 16, Mitch Marner, to really step up here. You can only get so much from your depth. At some point, you have to get some scoring from your $11 million guys. Mitch Marner does have 1 goal on the board in the series. So those are 2 guys I'm really looking at. And then on top of that, I've talked about Joseph Woll. I mean, he deserves all the praise. A guy that played for Boston College, so he has that ties to Boston. And I mean, prior to the series, he didn't really have success against the Bruins. I believe he was 0-2-1 against the Bruins in this season. So you talk about in the playoffs, completely different story, and he comes into game 5 with all the pressure and gets that victory. So I think with the momentum shifting, hopefully the Leafs can maybe do some favors for Joseph Woll here, because they haven't been able to get more than 2 goals against Jeremy Swayman when you look at the Boston Bruins net. So I do think, like I said, Mitch Marner, William Nylander, the core guys that are in the lineup need to really win it for AM34 tonight.
And the team could really use somebody like Austin Matthews. I want to talk a little bit more about that. He's obviously not playing tonight. What's going on, John?
It's such a mystery, and it always is a mystery when it comes to playoffs. And I referenced the Tampa Bay Lightning with them getting eliminated. You always see a long list of injuries after the fact. You never find out during the series, and you never find out while a team's still in the playoffs. So my assumption, and you really don't want to make too much assumptions when it comes to an injury, is that there was an illness that took place about early mid last week, and there was potentially whether it was lower body or some low-key injury that occurred in game 4 to take him out of the lineup. Because I think if you look at the progress of the series, he dominated in game 2. Game 3, maybe still battling from that illness. Game 4, they removed him from the lineup, and he didn't play the 3rd period. So I do believe something took place in that game 4, and maybe he was still struggling with that illness, but something happened from him playing game 4 to being taken out of that 3rd period. And of course, he hasn't played since. So that's kind of what I have so far. And that's kind of what other individuals around the game have. And we really don't have any other information past that.
Okay, well, regardless, John Viveros, the host of Hot Take Hockey Podcast, we're going to have a whole lot to talk about tomorrow morning.
Yeah, we sure will. John, thanks so much for this. And thank you for watching CP24 live at noon.